Hello and welcome back to a brand new video. This one, we're out doing something different again. We're here, I'm out in the ACT, for Canberra. We're also here at Flagstaff Gardens on 420. And also Nimbin. We're trying to figure out why Australia is so against legalization. Why wouldn't we just legalize it already? So in today's video, we're gonna be trying to figure that out. So yeah, I guess it's like legal here or some shit, which is pretty cool. And it's not technically legal here, just no one really gives a fuck. What are we gonna find out? I have no idea, but stay tuned, we have a banger in store. Let's get into it. So yeah, who are you? Why are you here?
I'm Ryan, and so I'm supposed to look at that.
I'm Michael.
I'm Wally.
My name is Ryan. It's a good name, isn't it? It's nice to meet you. I'm from Canberra. I'm just here to, can I swear on this podcast?
Yeah, please.
I'm just here to fuck around and play piano, to be honest with you.
Okay, my name is Gerald Taylor. I've lived here for a bit over 40 years now.
I'm Kat. I'm from Students for Sensible Drug Policy, and I'm here because weed should be legal. It's a medicine, it's a fun thing to do, and it's way better than alcohol.
My name's Morrigan.
I'm Fiona Patton.
Michael Balderstone. So I'm here because you asked me to be.
I'm Nikolai. I'm from Gundawindi, Queensland.
My name's Nick.
How you going? I'm Rod Gnarly, actually.
Hi, I'm David Shoebridge, one of the federal Green senators, and I have the justice portfolio for the party here because I think we're probably going to talk about legalising cannabis.
Weed is a weird one here. It's decriminalised, but not fully legal. What can you tell me about that firstly?
One of the things I like about Canberra is allegedly, if I have weed at my house and if cops come over and knock on the door, they cannot raid me. And if you have anything on you, that they have all rights to seize it and stuff like that. But I've talked to an officer firsthand, and I even told him before, so I got 3 grams of bud inside of my room, and it does not bother you at all. And they're like, nah, it doesn't bother me. And then I told them that they're the first officers that I thought were actually pretty cool.
Hello, sorry to interrupt. It is me from the future. Or I guess technically the past. So yeah, you're seeing a lot of dates, times, flashbacks, a lot of shit that probably doesn't make a heap of sense. So yeah, I thought I'd chuck this in and sort of explain what's going on because I've been working on this video for a bit over a year now. It really started around the end of May in 2024 when I basically had the idea for this video. I was doing some research into Greens Senator David Shoebridge's legalizing cannabis bill and realized the best way to actually find my research might just be to go to the source. So yeah, I basically found David's contact info and sent him an email. It all ran pretty smoothly and he seemed happy to chat, so over the next few weeks we sort of organised a date and a time. At this point it had basically been almost a year already since the legalising cannabis bill of 2023 had been introduced.
So we gave notice of the bill a little bit over a year ago. Then we consulted on our draft bill, and we did that through our office, and we had thousands of people engage with us on the consultation. And then, in an unusual move for politics, we listened to that consultation and we changed our draft bill. And I think we made it a lot better from the input we got from the community, and then we brought it into Parliament. And having brought it into Parliament at the end of last year, we got agreement from the Senate to have an inquiry, a Senate inquiry into the bill. We got hundreds of submissions, overwhelmingly supporting the bill and saying get on with it, but then politics got in the way.
It's pretty exciting really, as it's really Australia's first parliamentary effort at legalising cannabis. But you might be wondering what exactly the bill indicates, other than the obvious in legalising cannabis. This David will now explain.
Traditionally in Australia, when you talk about legalising cannabis, people have said, well, it has to happen at a state or a territory level, because states and territories have most of the legislation that largely makes it illegal. There are a number of problems with that. First of all, I was a state member of Parliament for about a decade, and I saw just how close state parliaments were to police unions, and that kind of really toxic law and order debate, you know, where you hear shock jocks come on and say, oh, you've got to put them all in jail kind of stuff. Yeah. And I could see all the barriers to getting cannabis law reform through at a state level. Now, I'm not saying we shouldn't. If we can't get it through federally, we should absolutely work our way through state and territories. But at a state level, you have the problems of what do you do about trade across borders? Someone might live in Albury and work in Wodonga. You know, how does their life work if you've got those problems?
Sure.
Also, and I'm going to be really selfish now as a politician, states can't put a sales tax on cannabis.
Right. Okay.
So they can't make any money out of legalising cannabis. And you may not have noticed this, Ryan, but politicians like to make money out of changes. They like a bit of public revenue. I like a bit of public revenue. And the only way you can put a cannabis sales tax on is if you do it at a federal level. That's just the way our constitution works. So there are a whole lot of benefits in doing it at a federal level. So we had to workshop with a bunch of lawyers about could the Commonwealth government do this? Because traditionally it's been seen as a state and territory thing. And when we got some pretty solid constitutional legal advice that we can. And so we drafted a bill. And creates a national market, prohibits most online advertising because we don't want to be bombarded with online advertising.
Sure.
Sets up a model where you can grow up to 6 cannabis plants yourself at home if you're an adult, without a license, without paying any tax. You can just get on and do it. Allows people to set up cooperatives if they want. Prohibits big pharma and big tobacco and the alcohol industry from getting into the industry at all. And sets in place a national regulator whose job is to regulate in the public interest and to put in place the licensing and registration of cannabis strains. And it kind of envisages a market where a bulk of the growing doesn't happen with corporates, it happens with cooperatives and small growers.
Sure.
And we have a national dispensary and cafe model where you can get a license to run a cafe, a cannabis cafe, you get a license to run a dispensary. It also puts in place a 25% sales tax for cannabis. There is some good news on that. We got the Parliamentary Budget Office to model it. It said that once you legalise cannabis, even with a 25% sales tax, the street price of cannabis will about halve over the first decade because it is just much more efficient to make cannabis in a legal market. You get rid of a lot of the sort of corrupting payments that need to be made. And so you end up getting a whole bunch of public revenue, about $30 billion in the first decade, and the retail price of cannabis reduced by about half. So it's kind of a win-win.
So yeah, let me know what you think about all of this so far. It's pretty exciting stuff. On a sort of personal level, I was curious about how his bill would actually impact medical patients. So, of course, I had to ask about that as well.
Yeah, well, the bill expressly says it doesn't have any impact on the current medicinal cannabis market, so we leave that to continue as it does. But the truth of the matter is, it's almost certainly going to put a downward pressure on the price of prescription cannabis as well, because if we have a well-regulated recreational market where growers are required to put in place safe product safety measures, such as ensuring it's not full of pesticides or toxic chemicals or growth accelerants, and then properly labelling the cannabis with when it was produced and what its strength is. Once we set up that recreational market, a bunch of people who are currently priced out of medicinal cannabis because it's so incredibly expensive may well have an option to medicate through the recreational market. So it won't have a direct impact. It leaves that whole regulatory system as it is. But it's almost certainly going to have that secondary impact by reducing the cost of that prescription medicine, and I think that's a good thing.
So yeah, I was pretty happy to hear that it wouldn't actually impact medical patients in any negative sort of ways. And I was also curious about how it was looking so far in terms of its success, I guess.
There are a whole bunch of bizarre responses from the major political parties, from Labor and the Coalition in particular. They both joined together and said, oh, this is terrible. If we legalise cannabis, then a whole lot of people will use cannabis. And we can't do that. I think probably what they've failed to understand in that analysis is a whole lot of people already use cannabis. It's just in an unregulated market where the regulators, if you can call them that, are sort of organised crime and bikie gangs. And they're not great on high quality regulation. And in fact, the data that we have out of Canada in particular, it shows tiny changes in overall cannabis use as a result of legalising cannabis, a tiny uplift. But a big chunk of that is people substituting cannabis for alcohol. And all the public health advice is that every time you get a substitution of cannabis for alcohol, you've got an overall public health benefit. So they catastrophized that legalising cannabis would lead to an increase in cannabis use. They relied upon some pretty dodgy data that the AMA put forward. And when they were tested on that, the Australian Medical Association, they couldn't back up their claims. And they also made a bunch of kind of spurious, obviously ridiculous reasons to not support it, such as cannabis has a bunch of proven really nasty health impacts. They kind of equated cannabis to, high-level methamphetamine use. Right. And none of the data suggests that. When you look at drugs and the spectrum of harm for different drugs, cannabis is much less harmful than tobacco or alcohol or those other drugs, and they kind of ignored all that evidence. So
Right.
It felt a bit like, I don't know, right? It felt like a bit like I'd stepped back into the 1950s when I was listening to them.
Yeah.
They couldn't get into their head that maybe actually after a really shit week at work, maybe someone would like to go to a really chilled out cannabis cafe in a lovely environment and, I'll give you a green stereotype here, have a cannabis matcha latte sitting on a beanbag instead of going to a pub. They couldn't get their head around that actually millions of Australians might like that as an option. They're adults and they can maybe choose that as an option. There are so many positives about legalising cannabis, but the fun police is also part of federal politics as well, right? I know for a fact they're out of touch with millions of Australians. And,
Yeah.
But yes, welcome to Australian politics, right?
So yeah, that was all of about June 2024. So, what happens next?
We're going to work out sometime in the next few months. We're going to bring it on in the Senate and bring it on to a vote. We're going to get them to, make their position known. And if they stick to what they said in the report, they're going to vote it down. And when they do, we're going to name and shame them in a national campaign. And we're going to stick to our guns for legalising cannabis, obviously in a peaceful and non-violent way, the Greens, and make it a sort of core demand in any new parliament. And we've got a federal election down the path. We could have a very interesting parliament after the next federal election, and we'd like to use whatever political strength we have in the next parliament to do a bunch of great things, and one of them would be legalising cannabis.
I thought this was all very interesting now, knowing the election results. But yeah, that pretty much does it for our chat with David. So over the next few months, we'll see a few updates pop up about the bill, and it will actually come to a vote. My time was spent trying to contact Anthony Albanese, Peter Dutton, and a few other relevant members, all of which never responded. Admittedly, it was quite a busy time for them, but I digress. I went on a road trip up north to Nimbin with a few stops along the way, including Canberra, to try and figure out why our country won't legalise it.
And last question, why do you think Australia is so against legalisation?
That is a huge question.
Let me think about that for a second.
Very difficult question, that one. It's a bit perplexing still in this day and age. It doesn't seem like they're very serious at looking at reform on too many levels at all, if any, particularly the legalisation area. And I'm not sure why, really.
We're too rich, I reckon.
Explain that. What do you mean by we're too rich?
Well, we're so rich we can employ this huge police force, we chase around trivial rules. We've got so many rules and regulations. Poor countries can't do all that. So we can have so many and enforce them with huge fines and court systems. And
it's always been about vested interests making money out of things that cannabis does perfectly well. And the capitalist system could not allow that. The capitalist system requires a few people making a lot of profits and control. And cannabis is completely the opposite spirit to that. It's an anarchist plant. It won't play by your rules. It'll get you to play by hers.
I think at the end of the day, because they cannot put a tax on it, because here's the thing, if you put 4 people who drink alcohol, words of Snoop Dogg himself, they're all going to go ahead and fight. You put 100 of people who are smoking weed, and I'm probably your average of all of them, they're not really going to fight or anything like that. I cannot help but to feel like there's this whole demeanor about it, and since this, I believe the Constitution about it was last updated in 1937, which is about 86, 87 years ago now. And back then, for example, they would say stuff like weed could cause cannibalization and stuff like that, which we now found out is untrue. I think that it's just a lack of research on their behalf, and the fact as well that it cannot be taxed.
I think one of the main things is like we have a huge alcohol culture that's heavily ingrained in Australia. We make a lot of money out of it. The government makes a lot of money for the taxation, gets increased every 6 months. So when weed does come into play and people are using that to either medicate themselves, have fun with friends, go out, whatever, you know, you're losing a huge chunk of that. That's one reason.
Oh, because pharmaceuticals aren't making money out of us, mate. Yeah, like we've given them the medical cannabis, which is sort of given them a little bit of leeway. Now we're going to go recreational, mate. Like everyone should be able to grow 6 plants in their backyard, grow it, share it, fucking enjoy it.
Well, we're in this funny phase of prohibition, you know, especially over the last few years where we've seen more kind of legalisation through medicalisation, you know. So obviously some of the folks here are allowed to smoke if they've, from a vape, if they've got their script on the doctor's orders. So whereas a few years ago when we were doing this, it was all completely illegal. Now we're in this weird grey area, but we don't have full legalisation yet. And that is apparently something that's going to be hard to achieve, although, you know, the ACT has its model where you can grow a few plants.
I believe as well, because you could also make clothing and stuff out of hemp, I believe that there would be a fair few distributions out in the world that would be sure to go a little bit under, or at least lose profit, if weed was legalized.
2, they're scared of putting any more pressure onto the hospitals and things that are already under so much stress.
Sure.
Especially now we're seeing a lot of psychosis cases come up with medicinal cannabis. But regardless, no one's died from cannabis. It's a relatively safe drug. It's one of the safest illicit drugs to do.
I think we've got a political class that isn't really in touch. It's you know, they've got a lot of their political attitudes. They were sort of frozen in, I say the 50s, but probably in the sort of 70s or mid-80s. They've got a stereotype of a cannabis user as somebody who drives a combi and uses a bucket bong, and they just don't really, they haven't got it, really. You know?
Look, we are behind in a lot of things, like when it comes to racism, when it comes to treaty, when it comes to so many things, we are behind. But we are a new country. We are an isolated country in terms of so many things. So we are so behind in so many laws that we don't get to experience the benefits that Canada, for instance, they had so many billions the first year, and then America with California taking suit and all throughout the states. It's just, when we finally get to be able to legalise it, it'll increase funding for so many jobs. It'll boost the economy by billions, and it just hasn't happened because we're just isolated and locked behind.
I think in terms of full legalisation, you know, you see it all happening in the US, for example. I've been doing it there for ages. Because I'm a bit of a policy nerd as well, so I nerd out on the different legalisation models, you know, is it government run or corporate or more kind of small community social clubs and all that kind of stuff. So I think as a community we need to have that conversation about what models we want to advocate for.
I think it's got to do with stigma around drugs, and I think when people start to educate themselves and realise that any drug can be used recreationally or medicinally, depending on how you do it, I think a lot of that will change.
I think it's just a mindset that was programmed many, many years ago, like the go smoke weed, go mad sort of thing. It was criminalised and mainly for financial gain with the companies that do nylons and stuff like that. And not to mention just the way they pumped it as, drive you fucking mad. And quite honestly, if you do have a mental disposition, you will have problems with it, and that's a reality of it.
Sure.
But like anything else, people can be allergic to Panadol. Everyone has a different sort of thing about it. And for ourselves, legalised cannabis has just changed a lot. But myself personally and my wife and a lot of other people fought for decriminalisation, which is different again.
Sure.
And it means the government isn't the biggest gangster, basically. And they take control and feed us shit that we really don't know what's in it. Because their regulations I've found over the past for anything, let alone weed, are pretty fucking low.
Australia should be a pretty sophisticated country, bravely engaging in the 21st century, and having a bunch of criminal offences for using cannabis, which were kind of dreamt up in the 30s, 40s and 1930s, 40s and 50s, and thinking that that's sort of sustainable. I mean, I don't think it is. You look at the rest of the world, they're getting on with it. I just think they are not in tune with the millions of Australians who also say they think the police have got better things to do than bust a young kid with a joint in his pocket.
Australia isn't against legalisation. In fact, 80% of Australians really believe that the law should change.
Yeah.
So it's just politicians are really slow on this. And that's because of the stigma around cannabis. And we just need to change it. And hopefully days like this help us change that stigma so politicians do not have to be so afraid of what cannabis legalisation could look like.
Australia is not.
Okay.
Parliament. Like, the ignorance isn't out there as bad as before, as when I was growing up and stuff. But since I started doing these mushroom tinctures, I've copped a lot of ignorance, hatred, abuse, everything, just because I'm trying to help people. And these are all legal, everything like that. And anyone who comes to me and asks about the magic mushrooms, I show them a picture of Galleria margeria.
Okay.
That's known as funeral bell, and it'll look the same as a magic mushroom, and it's got the same toxins as death caps.
Right.
So I'm here, yes, selling tinctures. At my market, I'm selling tinctures, but I educate.
So why won't it change? Big Pharma, huge lobbyists,
Sure.
and the police. The New South Wales is the oldest police force on the planet. Yeah, I think they need to be, if they're good-hearted, compassionate people, they should know what's going on, rather than that they're keeping their power, they have the last say, they lobby hard to stop change coming. They're the ones not letting the driving laws change, which are a massive drama for everyone. That a trace of cannabis in your system and you can't drive doesn't mean nothing to do with being impaired.
But the reason why the states and territories have been able to hold on to those particularly stupid cannabis-related driving laws is because they say cannabis is illegal, and therefore you shouldn't have any of it in your system. It's a terrible illegal drug, terrible, terrible, terrible. And that's why they can justify their stupid drug driving laws. Once we make cannabis legal, and we will, once we make it legal, that whole justification for stupid drug driving laws falls away. And I think that will inevitably lead to a bunch of long-needed reform of those laws. So we're looking at impairment, not presence.
So yeah, that trip was in November 2024. But what I failed to actually realise was that David's legalising cannabis bill would come to a vote while I was away. On the 27th of November 2024, the Parliament voted on the bill, marking the first time the federal parliament had voted on a plan to legalise recreational cannabis across the country. Unfortunately, the result was a 13 to 24 vote against the legislation. Over the next couple of months, I would try to contact David again for a follow-up interview to see where he thought it sort of went wrong. As I was preparing for my Mardi Gras video, I realised that David would actually be there speaking. After a few technical difficulties, we organised to meet up again during Mardi Gras, the first weekend of May in 2025. At this point, it had almost been a year since starting the original video. And conveniently, this clip that you're about to see was recorded a day before the most recent federal election. So yeah, this has been a long time coming. And now we're here in person, so the mouse won't be on the screen, which is good. But yeah, so who are you and why are you here?
Yeah, well, I'm David Shoebridge. I'm a Green Senator. I represent New South Wales, but I have amongst other things, the justice portfolio for the Greens federally, and part of that was the legislation we presented last Parliament, and we're going to present again next Parliament.
Cool.
To legalise cannabis, a recreational cannabis industry across the whole country.
Okay.
And, you know, what better spot to talk about it than Nimbin Mardi Gras?
Perfect.
Yeah.
And so where do you think it sort of went wrong, like, if that's the right word to put it, like...
No, I don't think it went wrong.
Yeah.
I mean, what I think it did was it crystallised how we have to break down that two-party dominance in the federal parliament.
Yeah.
Two deadheads sort of... It's not just on legalising cannabis. You could point to pretty much any part of the national debate, and those two are coming together, Labor and the Coalition, to screw the country over.
Yeah.
I think it just was yet more confirmation that we need, well, a minority parliament. We're doing this interview, on Friday before the Saturday election. This is 3 May, tomorrow's 3 May for the election. You know, it just demonstrated again why, if you think the answer is going to come out of the Labor Party or the Coalition, well, then you haven't been watching. So we presented the legislation. It was interesting, actually. Some of the surprise was that we didn't get the likes of Jackie Lambie and others across to support it, say even David Pocock in the ACT. And they, you know, politicians often come up with reasons that I don't think are particularly credible to justify their position. I think David Pocock said it was a states' rights issue, that the Commonwealth shouldn't legislate.
Right.
On that basis, the Commonwealth wouldn't do anything. Jackie Lambie, I think, just found it all too challenging, the politics of it. But I tell you, I don't find the politics at all challenging. There's millions and millions of Australians who want us to just get on with it, legalise cannabis, stop putting 60,000 people a year through the criminal justice system because they've got a joint in their pocket. You know, we had a Senate inquiry, huge public support for the bill. When it's tested in opinion polls, growing public support to legalise cannabis. It's just the sort of traditional broken politics of the Labor Party and the Coalition. You know, computer says no. For me, it kind of did what we needed it to do. It demonstrated that the Commonwealth Parliament, if it's got some courage and some bit of vision, we know there's a pathway to legalise it for the country.
Okay.
And we can talk through all the benefits of that.
Sure.
But it also pointed out who the real political problems are. And it turns out it's the Labor Party and the Coalition, like it's always been.
So, yeah, I think in our last chat you said basically if you can't get it through federally, then you'll try like state and territories. Are we at that like level, or is it...
Absolutely not. I mean, we're literally, as I said, this is Friday, tomorrow is a federal election, right?
Cool.
What I think you'll probably see is a growing support for the crossbench.
Yeah.
Because people are kind of sick and tired of two failing sort of old, tired parties. And I fully support any effort at a state or territory level to legalise, right?
Sure.
And we sort of to tear down the structure. And, you know, my colleague, Kate Fairman, Greens MP in the state level, she's there presenting legislation to legalise cannabis in New South Wales. My Justice colleagues in Victoria, Northern Territory, Queensland, WA, we just got a record number of Greens elected in WA. They're all on board, you know, and I didn't mean to forget SA and Tassie, but they're all on board to legalise cannabis and to get it through. It's just at a state level, you don't just have the dead wood of Labor and the Coalition.
Yeah.
You've got also the state police forces and a bunch of kind of local shock jocks, right-wing shock jocks that make it even harder at a state level than a federal level. So we're going to keep chipping away at it. But the big answer is actually just a single bill to legalise it federally.
Cool.
Yep.
I also asked him about his opinion on his exclusion of tobacco and alcohol industries getting involved and if he thought that had an impact on the result.
You know, there's these wave of imports coming even in the medicinal cannabis space, and increasingly that industry is being owned by Global Tobacco and some big multinationals, and they're making some good profit.
Yeah, sure.
And is that a problem? Yeah, absolutely, it is a problem. One of the concerns we have is that the scale of the imported medicinal cannabis and the lack of controls, no one checks where it comes when it lands on shore, no one's checking the quality, that's actually bleeding into the illegal recreational market.
Right.
Coming in through the borders from supplies that are backed in by big Global Tobacco. So, you know, and do they want us to legalise cannabis and have a local industry here? Probably not. And, you know, we should be frank about those challenges we have.
Yeah,
Global Tobacco doesn't want us legalising cannabis here and having a domestic industry. It's not in their interests. And they love the Labor Party. They love the Coalition.
So yeah, with all this being said, it does still leave us with that final question. Why is Australia so against legalisation?
Well, Australia isn't.
Yeah,
Like,
okay.
you ask millions of Australians, they say, well, what the fuck? You know, of course we should legal. Look, the sky hasn't fallen in Canada.
Yeah.
You know, it's still firmly up in Thailand. Let's just get on and do it. Most Australians say, what on earth are we doing spending billions of dollars of public money in police forces and courts and jails, like criminalising a plant when the rest of the world has legalised it?
Sure.
And instead of spending police money and public resources on it, trying to criminalise a plant, they're actually making tax dollars out of it and a new industry out of it and new jobs out of it. Yeah. So you say, you know, why is Australia against it? I think Australia is absolutely on board with legalising cannabis. It's just we've got these kind of two, the dead hand of Labor and the dead hand of the coalition, preventing that happening in the federal parliament and in state and territory parliaments across the country. I mean, the one place where we have had major reform is the ACT.
Yeah.
That didn't happen by accident. The reason it happened in the ACT is there's a minority parliament there that Labor can only govern with the support of the Greens. Like, you know, maybe put one and one together and come up with two. Like, that's the answer. So that's how we get it to happen. We got to break some of that deadlock. You know, for decades and decades and decades, this country has kind of been governed into the ground by either majority Labor or majority coalition pretending to compete, but literally delivering a really common agenda, which has not been good for the public interest. It's been bad for our defence posture. We tie ourselves to the United States without thinking, and they're now just giving Donald Trump a bear hug, trying to compete about who loves him more. That's not reflecting the Australian public. We've got 1 in 3 big corporations that don't pay any tax in this country because it turns out they get a better return by donating to the Labor Party and the coalition than they would by paying tax. We have a housing crisis because state and federal parliaments don't invest in public housing. We have a public health crisis because they're not putting enough money into Medicare. And that's the same system that refuses to legalise cannabis. We've got to break that system.
So yeah, what do you guys think? Why do you think Australia is so against legalisation? Do you think the politicians are just out of touch, or maybe because of its negative stigma? Let me know down below, and yeah, keep the comments open as a discussion space. Please make sure you like the video down below and subscribe if you enjoyed it, as yeah, this did take a fucking long time to make. I'm already working on my next one that's in a similar vibe to this, so yeah, ring the notification bell so you know when that is up. Big thanks to everyone that made this video possible, including everyone that I interviewed. Regular viewers will probably recognize a lot of these people as they have been in other videos. If you're new, make sure you go through the channel and watch a bunch of the other videos, and yeah, you can try and find them if you want. Also mainly big thank you to David Shoebridge and his team, Kilty, Hash, and everyone else behind the scenes that made this possible. Thank you for constantly giving me your time throughout the year to chat shit and learn, I guess. But yeah, thank you all for watching, and I will see you next week in the next one. Peace and love.